Smoothen Silky presents Curse of the Blue Diablo. Come on, you bunch of pansies. You want to make the show one day or don't you? Blackwell barked up the hill, shaking his head at the 7 wrestlers huffing and puffing their way to the top. They were just beyond the Anarchist Championship Wrestling Promotion training camp, pushing their bodies to perform harder and faster. Frankie and Brian were the first to hit the bottom of the hill again, collapsing next to each other in the dirt with fatigue. Brian flopped over onto his back, running his hands through his blonde hair. Frankie remained face down, the neon green of his tight jogging pants making his ass a giant beacon for the others in the evening sun. Sarah barreled down after them, skidding in the gravel on the bottom half of the hill and tripping over Frankie. She let herself fall, just to have the chance to rest, and left her legs propped up on the blonde's chest. She was happy she'd wound her long brown hair into a bun for this, as she felt like she'd sweated out twice her body weight that night. Dave and Tommy leaned on each other, their dark hair looking the same shade in the dusky light. They supported each other as they panted for breath, clearly staggered from running up and down this hill so many times. "Come on, line up!" Blackwell demanded hoarsely, and Dave and Tommy groaned in unison, facing the hill again. The last 2 to jog gracefully down the hill joined the line, and they couldn't be more different. Tate, the tall All-American wrestler with the bulging pecs and flowing blonde hair, grinned smugly as he joined the lineup, flexing to show that he wasn't fazed in the slightest by all this hard work. He gave his short, masked companion a hard shove. "You ready to get your ass kicked, boy?" he sneered. "I'm the star of this promotion, and I'm going to show you why." The stocky wrestler in the black and blue mask didn't betray any emotion from his face being hidden. "Big words from a small man," he rasped with a throaty Spanish accent. "Bitch, please. I got at least 6 inches on you," Tate snarled. "Not where it counts," the masked man replied, a hint of amusement in his voice, and the taller wrestler lunged for him. Tommy and Dave recovered their breath enough to hold their blonde firecracker over worker back. "Jesus Christ, tater tot, keep it in your pants," Blackwell barked, his grizzled face deep in a frown. "Sorry, Mr. Blackwell," Tate muttered, shrugging his friends off violently. He turned to the hill, scowling at it as if it had done him a great disservice. "All right, one more trip to the top, ladies," the old wrestler grunted. "Whoever gets there and rings the bell first doesn't have to do the 6-mile fun run tomorrow morning. So is everybody who hasn't already shit themselves ready to go?" "Yes, sir," the 4 left standing yelled. "On my mark," Blackwell bellowed. 3, 2, 1, go! Tommy and Dave made it about 20 feet before tripping over themselves in a heap, having spent the last shreds of their energy on holding their coworker back. Tate, the man in question, tore up the hill in perfect synchronicity with the man in the mask despite their height difference. The shorter man managed to pull ahead right at the crest of the hill and reached out for the bell, but Tate lunged forward and knocked him clean into the bell post. He stood there, smugly looking down at the man he'd knocked over, and smirked at him as he rung the bell several times. "That's right, you second-class piece of shit. I'm the champion," he said, voice laced with warning. He cackled as he turned and strutted down the hill, chest puffed out like a caveman. The masked man picked himself up off of the ground, brushing the dirt from his legs and shoulders as he clomped down the hill to the others. Tate stopped abruptly halfway down, leaning until he was nose to nose with his masked companion. "Just remember, you're always going to be a loser when you're up against me," he growled, and then his eyes lit up with mischief. "Maybe if you took off that mask." His hand shot out to grab the bottom of the mask and started to jerk it up, but the short man immediately punched him in the throat. As the blonde's eyes bugged out of his head and he gasped for air, the shorter man shoved him just enough to send him tumbling down the hill. "This mask is sacred and never leaves my face in the presence of others," the short man declared as he traveled the rest of the way down. "You touch it again, and you're gonna have a problem." Tommy helped Tate back to his feet, the blonde's eyes blazing with anger as he caught his breath. Blackwell stepped between them and stared at his prize pony. "Serves you right, Tate," he began. "You may call yourself American All-Star, but you're really just an American asshole. You just can't stand that the new guy kicked your ass, can you? I saw what you did at the top of the hill. Because of that and your little display here, you get to go check the morning fun run trail for downed branches. I suggest you get going unless you want to be checking by moonlight." Tate simply grunted in response, tugging Tommy along with him as he stared the shorter man down. He lowered his mouth to Tommy's ear. "Give me 2 hours, then bring him up to Fire Rock. Tell him whatever you need to. Just get him there. It's time for his initiation." "You got it," the dark-haired wrestler replied with a nod. "Now shove me like you're on his side," Tate instructed, and his co-worker complied, pushing him hard towards the trail. "Go on! Get out of here, Tate! Serves you right!" he cried, and the blonde shot him a petulant middle finger. "Fuck you, Tommy!" "Tate," Blackwell growled sternly, "run, now!" The blonde turned and took off down the trail, disappearing into the trees as Tommy approached the masked man. "Hey, look, man, sorry about Tate," he said apologetically. "He's just stressed out about some scouts from the biggest Texas promotion coming to our next show." "It's okay," the masked man shook his head. "It's not your fault, he's a prick." "So what's your story, man?" Tommy asked conversationally, shoving his hands into his pockets and bouncing on the balls of his feet. "You've been out here all day running with us, and you haven't said barely anything until now." "My character is silent," the shorter man shrugged. "I usually employ that when I'm around others. It's nothing personal. I just don't often break character." "I understand that," Tommy nodded. "Being professional is a big part of the business. Well, look, man, I'm Tommy, and that's my brother Brian. We're the Brain Bashers, the top tag team." He motioned to the blonde still flopped on the ground, who gave a lazy salute. "That's Dave. He has a heavy metal persona and goes by Shredder in the ring." "What's up, man?" Dave strolled over and extended his hand. "Hey, if you ever want to team up and do a mariachi metal tag team, I think we can kick these guys' asses." He grinned and the masked man nodded, shaking his hand firmly. "That bright green ass over there is Frankie." Tommy pointed to the neon-clad man who was doing some yoga stretches to wind down after all the running. "He goes by Hollywood in the ring. Total 80s motif, you know, like Frankie Goes to Hollywood." Tommy received a nod and then motioned to the brown-haired woman who was just getting to her feet, daintily brushing dust from her irresistibly tight jogging pants. "And finally, we have Sarah, who is our little debutante. Southern delight. Only thing sweeter than her is the tea," Tommy concluded, and she smiled brightly at the newbie. "Nice to meet you," she said, eyes alight with charm. "Likewise," the masked man replied. "So, what's your name?" Tommy asked, keeping the conversation rolling. "Obviously you're a luchador, but what do you go by?" "Coming up in Mexico, I was known as Diablo Azul, which translates into the Blue Diablo," the short man said thoughtfully. "Blackwell has suggested if I want to get a following outside of the region, I should go with the English translation. I haven't decided yet." "So what should we call you?" Tommy shrugged. "Neither of those exactly roll off of the tongue in conversation." "Just call me BD," the shorter man replied, and then his lips twisted into a small smile. "Or Mr. Diablo." There was an awkward silence, and he glanced around the group. He chuckled awkwardly. "Gotcha." There was a smattering of laughs throughout the wrestlers, and Sarah started the procession inside. "So, BD, we have a bit of a tradition at this camp," Tommy said as they walked. "After we survive the first day, we all head down the trail a bit to a place called Fire Rock. We grab some beers and swap some of our more colorful wrestling stories. You want to join us this evening?" "I'm not exactly the talkative type," Blue Diablo protested, with a shake of his head. "Oh, come on," Sarah drawled, eyes big and pleading as she slipped her arm into his. "It would be great to get to know you."
"Yeah, come on, bud. A couple of beers ain't gonna kill you,"
Frankie piped up, and the short masked man figured it would be easier to give in than to argue. And this group seemed like they were a lot better company than that insufferable Tate.
"Okay,"
he agreed.
"Fantastic,"
Tommy grinned. "Let's go get cleaned up, and we'll take off." That night, atop a large rock deep in the woods, Dave stoked a well-built campfire surrounded by stone seats. Brian opened the cooler Tommy had hauled out there, and passed out beer to everyone. Sarah offered one to Blue Diablo with a hand on her hip and a smile on her lips, but he graciously refused. "So, yeah, man, I was on the undercard of this show somewhere out in West Texas, and I swear to Christ there were more scorpions in the building than people," Dave was saying as he added more logs to the fire. "It was one of these small towns where their normal source of entertainment during the week was seeing how far they could slingshot roadkill." "Oh, come on," Sarah wrinkled her nose as she popped the cap off of her beer. "The town couldn't have been that bad." "Sarah, I swear, right hand to God, if I had asked the audience for a soda and some meth, I would have had a wider variety of meth to pick from." Dave put a hand over his heart and the other in the air, gaze so serious she giggled. This was not a great town. So anyway, I was facing off against this local kid. He didn't know suplex from a supermarket, but for some reason he was popular in the town. Well, he decided to get bold and refused to sell a couple of my punches. Just stood there like he was a methed-up Superman. The crowd started going wild, chanting his name, which kind of rubbed me the wrong way. He squared his shoulders. So I laid him out for real. "Bullshit, man," Brian exclaimed. "Swear to fucking God, Brian. Swear to God." Dave nodded, emphatically. "This kid didn't fall to the mat, though. I hit him so hard he went through the ropes and into the front row." "And how did that work out for you?" Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Well, turned out he had a couple of brothers and a few cousins, all with a mean streak." Dave shuddered. "Next thing I know, I'm knocking out his extended family and trying to get the hell out of there before I end up in jail. Hardest $40 I ever made." "Wait, the promoter still paid you?" Frankie blurted, eyes wide in disbelief. "Hell yeah, he did," Dave laughed. "Said that was the biggest reaction he's ever seen at one of his events. He offered to double my pay if I came back to smack his mama around at the next show." "Did you do it?" Sarah asked, excitement in her voice. "Come on, Sarah." He rolled his eyes. "Come on, Dave," she replied, mocking him complete with the eye roll. "We all know you're a whore, and we'll do anything for money." "This is true, but goddammit, I'm a high-priced whore." He straightened and pretended to preen himself. "Gotta at least hit triple digits before I'll smack somebody's mother." "Yeah, well, that still doesn't hold a candle to what I have to go through," she replied with a grimace. "Oh, why's that?" Dave teased. "Because you're a delicate little flower?" "You're goddamn right I'm a delicate little flower," she agreed, striking a little pose and flipping her hair. "And yeah, you try looking like this and walking through a crowd of drunken rednecks whose wives won't let them go to the strip club. They have to settle for grabbing my ass on a Saturday night." "To be fair, it is quite grabbable," Brian piped up with a lopsided grin on his face. "Of course it is," she agreed. "Do you have any idea how many squats I have to do in order to keep this up?" A chuckle rippled through the group around the glow of the fire. "So, BD, you have any crazy wrestling stories?" Tommy prompted, motioning to the short masked man with his beer bottle. You know, nothing out of the ordinary," Blue Diablo replied with a shrug. "I mean, I was pretty popular in some parts of western Mexico. Got such a following that I would get booked for private events." "Like what? Kids' birthdays and shit?" Tommy asked. "More like private shows for the cartels," the shorter man corrected, and a hush fell over the group. They glanced at each other and then back at him, until Dave broke the silence. "Like drug cartels?" "No, Dave, like the maple syrup cartels in Canada," Sarah retorted with another eye roll. Of course, the fucking drug cartels. She turned to Blue Diablo with softer eyes. Please excuse Dave. He's a moron.
It's quite all right, the masked man nodded in acceptance. But yes, the drug cartels. Now, I don't know about the stress of having to perform in front of some methed-out desert people, but I'm guessing that it's a little less stressful than performing with one of the cartel boss family members.
Holy hell, dude, that's nuts, Frankie blurted, eyes wide.
Yeah, not my best show by far,
Blue Diablo agreed.
One of the bodyguards pulled me aside before the show and said if anything happened to the kid, that my family would receive a map to all the places where my body was buried.
Yeah, BD. I think you got me on the stress level with that one. Dave shook his head in disbelief. Holy shit. How did you even perform that night? Sarah inquired, leaning forward with anticipation.
It was kind of a blur, to be honest,
Blue Diablo replied, spreading his hands with his palms up.
Only thing I remember is being amazed that I figured out that there is a middle ground between a body slam and gently tucking a child into bed.
Everyone burst into laughter, bellies clenching with the force of it. Well, looks like everyone is having a grand old time here, Tate bellowed, stepping into the firelight, and the laughter stopped immediately. The silence was palpable, everyone tense and ready to spring, except for Blue Diablo, who simply smirked through his mask.
You still upset, Tate? He asked. Or have you had a chance to work through your frustrations on your hike?
The blonde wasted no time lunging forward to shove the masked man from his seat. Brian and Tommy dove to help pick him up, but Blue Diablo got to his feet, squaring his broad shoulders. Just getting started blowing off steam. Tate crossed his arms, grinning wide as Brian and Tommy grasped the masked man's arms to hold him in place. The others flanked him, and he glanced from side to side smugly, asserting his position as alpha of the group.
What are you doing?
Blue Diablo asked, though he didn't sound worried or afraid. I'll tell you what we're doing, you mask-wearing freak, Tate snarled, narrowing his eyes. We're giving you your walking papers. Now, I don't give a fuck what Blackwell wants for a promotion. I'm the star. I'm the one who puts asses in those seats. I'm the one who is destined for greatness.
So, what's stopping you?
The masked man prompted, a hint of sarcasm in his tone. You and Blackwell, you come in here with your luchador act and want to compete in the same ring as me? Tate scoffed, putting a hand to his chest in disbelief. I know he wants to make you champ so he can get those dollars from your beaner fan base. They would throw down the pesos by the fistful to watch their Mexican homeboy whoop on an American all-star. In the blink of an eye, I go from champion to a fucking joke. We all do, playing second fiddle to your kind. He reeled back and spit on the rock that Blue Diablo had been sitting on, face twisted with disgust. As soon as that happens, those scouts stop coming to the shows, and I end up stuck doing these house bits in high school gyms until I'm a broken fucking old man. The rest of these guys will never move up, and have to spend the rest of their days in this industry being marked in fucking Mexican. I'm not gonna let that happen. Tate finished shrilly, eyes wild and fists clenched.
Wow, you are one racist piece of shit, you know that?
Blue Diablo was in awe, and shook his head. Tate punched him in the gut with all of his muscular glory, causing the masked man to slump forward. Now, here's what's gonna happen. The blonde put a hand on his opponent's shoulder, buffed up from being top dog. You are gonna walk back to your car, hop in, and drive off before the sun comes up. You understand me, cocksucker?
Not gonna happen, Tate.
Blue Diablo shook his head, and Tate growled, hooking his fingers into the collar of his shirt, fingering the bottom of the mask. Before his captive could protest, he drew the blue and black fabric up over his face, and the Mexican wrestler struggled as if his life depended on it.
"Motherfucker!" he screamed. "I'll kill you!"
The blonde simply punched him again, fist hard and winding, causing Blue Diablo to fall to his knees. Tommy and Brian let go of him in shock, staring down at the veteran wrestler on his knees. Tate strutted over to the fire, examining the fabric by the dim light. This shit's made in Mexico, so it's gotta be flammable. He sneered and extended his hand as if to drop the mask into the flames. Blue Diablo roared a fierce battle cry, launching himself off of the ground at the tall American all-star. Tate dove out of the way, shoving him in the process, expecting to have to turn and fight. Instead, a sickening crack resonated through the still forest air, and 6 hearts skipped a beat in unison. "What the fuck, Tate?" Sarah's shrill question cut the silence. "What did you do?"
"What can I say?"
The blonde shrugged, trying to appear nonchalant through his fear. "He went crazy, fell, and killed himself." "Fucking hell, man!" the brunette cried, shoving him with all her might. "What are we gonna do?" Brian piped up, clenching and unclenching his fists. They were so sweaty all of a sudden, and almost made little squelching sounds at the movement. "Calm down," Tate rolled his eyes, putting his hands up. "No, seriously, this is bad. This is really bad," Frankie rambled, crossing his arms as his body temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Calm down," Tate repeated. Dave ran his hands through his hair, hands shaking, eyes darting around everywhere in the darkness. "We gotta call the police." "Everybody calm the fuck down," Tate yelled, and the tense silence returned, heaving breaths the only sound. He looked down at the pool of blood rapidly forming beneath Blue Diablo's head, his eyes open in bugged-out shock. "Brian, you run back to the camp and get some shovels." Brian gaped at him. "What?" "Just do it," Tate barked, sounding so much like Blackwell that it made them all want to line up in front of him. "Go, right now!" Brian clenched his jaw and darted off down the trail. "Dave, Tommy, Frankie, help me pick him up," the blonde continued, motioning to the body. "We have to go deep into the woods to a spot that nobody will ever find him." "What about me?" Sarah's voice was small, the southern lilt making her sound almost childlike in her fear. "We're going due north, 1/2 a mile, maybe even a mile," Tate replied. "When Brian gets back with the shovels, lead him to us, okay?" She swallowed hard but didn't answer, nor acknowledge his question. "Okay?" he demanded harshly, and she winced, biting her lip. "Okay," she snapped, hating the quiver in her voice. "God damn it, okay." "Good. Let's move like we have a purpose, people," Tate instructed, and hooked his arms under the dead wrestler's torso. Chapter 1. 1 year later. "Hey, boss, I'm at my first match." Alex Nantz cradled a cell phone between his shoulder and cheek as he adjusted his blue wrestling boots. He straightened up and stretched his arm high over his head, and then switched the device to his other hand so he could stretch the other.
Good,
the older man on the other end said.
"You been able to locate the target?"
"If all goes to plan, I'm going to make the offer this weekend," Alex replied, and leaned against the row of lockers with surprising grace, despite his 6-foot frame.
"Fantastic news,"
came the response.
"There's a shitstorm of epic proportions on the horizon, and we're going to need all hands on deck."
That was the understatement of the century. "I understand, boss," the brunette nodded, and started to bob back and forth from his left to his right foot. "But I do want to go on record as saying that this is an incredibly risky recruit for the agency, sir. I mean, you know his background, after all."
"Duly noted, Nance,"
his superior acknowledged.
"I know you'll do the job and deliver the agency a valuable new recruit."
"As always, sir," Alex saluted, regardless of the fact that the man on the other end couldn't see him.
"Contact me when it's done,"
the boss instructed. "You got it, boss," Nantz said, and then ended the call, tossing his phone into the locker he'd been provided. A grizzled old wrestler strode into the locker room, eyes sweeping the room.
"Nance,"
he barked.
"You're up."
"Coming, Mr. Blackwell," the brunette said with a smile, and popped his neck as he approached the man in the doorway.
"Look, kid, I know you were big time a while back,"
Blackwell said firmly.
"But you've been out of the game for a while now, and have to pay your dues again. You got it?"
"I'm just here to work, sir," Alex assured him.
"Good."
His new employer nodded his appreciation.
"Now, I don't want you going in there doing no sells and getting this idea in your head that you're gonna beat the American All-Star tonight, okay?
Yes, sir, he nodded.
You got any questions?
Blackwell raised an eyebrow. How long do you want the match? Alex rolled his shoulders.
This is your first time with us, so we can't have you do too good of a job against the champ, the older man mused. Anything more than 90 seconds will be too much.
The blue-clad wrestler nodded. Yes, sir.
One more thing,
Blackwell prompted. Sir? Alex raised an eyebrow.
What's your ring name?
The older man rolled his fingers in the air as if searching for a word.
You know, Crusher, Magnum, shit like that.
Alex Nantz, the agent shrugged.
Going with your real name? That's a bold move that rarely pays off,
Blackwell chuckled to himself.
But what the hell, there's only like 70 people here anyway. Have at it.
The newest wrestler strode over to the staging area and bounced on the balls of his feet again.
Newcomer, the invader in blue, Alex Nantz,
the announcer cried, and the entire crowd hooted a chorus of boos as he walked to the ring, arms in the air. Well, at least if they're booing that means they're paying attention, Alex thought, grinning at the snarling audience. They were spitting mad, and he admired their passion. If they only knew what was going on out in the world, but ignorance was bliss, as they say.
And in this corner, defending reigning champion, the purebred US of A, the American All-Star,
the announcer bellowed, and the crowd erupted into a rising crescendo of cheers. As Tate burst into the arena, everyone got to their feet, throwing fists in the air and screaming their heads off. The golden-haired giant wore a full-length black robe and strutted along the front row of fans, high-fiving them with a wild smirk on his face. Remember, Nance, you are here to do a mission. Recruit the target at all costs. You are not here to kick this schmuck's ass and win the title. Alex repeated this in his head like a mantra, his annoyance at the idiot growing the more he tried to build up the crowd. He finally slipped out of his robe, hopping into the ring, and puffed his chest out, clenching his fists in anticipation. Alex extended his hand to shake, and Tate sneered at him, grabbing his hand and using the momentum to sucker-kick him right in the stomach. Alex grunted and narrowed his eyes, staggering backwards and then instantly launching himself forward. His fist connected with Tate's chest, but the blonde simply grinned and flexed for the insane crowd, flexing his muscles, unfazed. He chopped, and Alex sold it like a pro, flying backwards into the ropes. He bounced back, and they grappled momentarily. Tate gaining the upper hand and flipping the brunette around, throwing him at the edge of the ring. As Alex rebounded back to him, the blonde leapt into a flying dropkick and connected with significant power, shattering his opponent's nose. The man in blue hit the floor, blood pouring from his face like a river, half dazed by the carnage. He didn't know if it was sloppiness or a complete disregard for his well-being, but he wasn't impressed. The crowd somehow got even louder as Tate planted his foot casually on Alex's chest for the 3 count. And after his official win, he dove out of the ring to do a victory lap. He punched the air, eyes wild, jumping up and down like a kitten on cocaine. Alex rolled over and ducked out of the ring, leaving a trail of crimson in his wake, and one of the attendants passed him a white towel. Alex nodded in appreciation, not wanting to open his mouth for verbal thanks, lest he get a mouthful of the Niagara Falls that was his face. When the American All-Star finally strolled into the locker room, he shot a lopsided grin at the brunette, inspecting his broken nose in the mirror. "Oh, damn, new guy. Looks like I did a little damage to you," Tate said, though he didn't sound very regretful nor surprised. He chuckled. "Well, I guess that's a significant enough welcome to the promotion. You know, the scouts don't like it when you botch moves like that," Alex commented casually, gently pinching the bridge of his nose to assess the break. It was clean, at least. "Excuse me?" The blonde's eyes were menacing as he stepped forward, unimpressed with the new wrestler's insinuation. "I assume you don't want to stay at this level forever, so I wanted to give you some free advice. Alex straightened up and turned to address Tate face to face, instead of through the reflection of the mirror. "Who the fuck do you think you are, newbie?" the All-Star snarled, just as Blackwell strode into the room. "That's Alex Nantz, you dipshit," the old man snapped. "So?" Tate crossed his arms petulantly. "Dude was a legend in North Texas for years," Blackwell motioned to his newest employee. "Big athletic, one hell of a high flyer. Was on his way to the show before a table throw didn't go as planned. I saw the video of that. Holy shit, that was hard to sit through. I mean, the way your leg was bending, ugh," he grimaced, motioning to his own leg in sympathy. "What kind of damage did that cause?" "Torn ACL, MCL, and a dislocated kneecap," Alex replied. With a flick of his wrist, he crunched his nose back into place. 4 surgeries, and 6 months later, I was finally allowed to walk without crutches. "So why are you back?" Tate narrowed his eyes. "I'm a recruiter of sorts." Alex shrugged, and the blonde's eyes lit up like a kid in a candy store. "A recruiter? Really? For who?" he blathered. "After your performance in the ring tonight, you better hope he's taking the night off," Blackwell scoffed. Tate put his hands up in a placating gesture. "Oh, shit, damn, dude. Yeah, I'm so sorry about your nose." His voice was sickly sweet, and Alex resisted the urge to roll his eyes. "I mean, we just haven't had a chance to work together, and our timing is off." "That's why Nantz is going to the retreat this weekend," Blackwell put in firmly, crossing his arms across his chest. "Oh man, that's awesome!" Tate grinned massively, though his eyes were pleading and desperate. "Hey, look, to show that there's no hard feelings, the group and I are heading up after the show tonight. Blackwell isn't going to be up there until tomorrow afternoon, but we go up to have some drinks and shoot the shit, you know? Why don't you come with us?" He was still grinning as Blackwell wandered off, and Alex nodded. "I'd be honored," he said, and the blonde clapped him on the back. The agent resisted the urge to break his nose for touching him. "Oh, hell yeah!" Tate exclaimed. "Well, hey man, I gotta go press the flesh with some fans and go save Hollywood from getting his ass kicked by the Shredder. But after the show, we have a driver to take us up so we can drink on the way. Just meet by the ring." "I look forward to it," Alex replied, and the blonde gave him 2 thumbs up, backing out the door and scurrying off. The agent finally got to roll his eyes, dabbing the last of the blood from his face before tossing the towel into the laundry. It was going to be a long night. Chapter 2. The group sat in a circle at Fire Rock, exchanging beer and hot dogs over a little inferno that Brian continued to stoke up. The mountain air was clean and enriching, all pine and earth. The fire crackled happily. "So, what do you think, Nantz?" Dave asked, a twinkle in his eye. They'd only allowed him to drop his bags before shuffling him up the trail to that drinking spot, giving him only a glimpse at the outside of the buildings in the compound. But he'd gotten an idea of the size. "Not a bad place for training, huh? Pretty impressive for a small-end promotion." The newest wrestler nodded, cracking open a fresh beer. He took a deep gulp and relished in the cool bitterness sliding down his throat. "Yeah, Blackwell used to run one of the higher-up promotions back in the 80s, Brian piped up with his wood pile they'd built. Like most of those, they went by the wayside, but he ended up with his place as a nice consolation prize. "Yeah, there's a full-sized ring in the warehouse, and an old but totally sufficient gym," Sarah added. "The bunkhouse makes Motel 6 look like the Ritz-Carlton, but at least there's heat." "Simple works," Alex replied with a shrug. "So, what's the plan for this evening?" Tate squared his shoulders. "Well, Mr. Nantz." "Just Nantz," the agent put up a hand. "All right, Nantz," the blonde corrected himself. "You're looking at it. This is Fire Rock. Usually we come up here after the first day of training to unwind, but seeing as how Blackwell won't be here until tomorrow, figured we'd go ahead and do it tonight. Give you a chance to get to know everybody." He motioned around the circle. "Sounds good," Alex nodded. He clinked his beer bottle against Tommy's, who launched into a story that had absolutely nothing to do with wrestling. The others made noises of awe or disapproval, as Brian grinned lazily the whole time, poking at the fire with his stick. It was an easy routine, one he felt like they'd been doing for a long time. And that's when Brian and me had to sneak out the back before her husband came home, Tommy finished, and they high-fived. Why in God's name did you think it was okay to tell that story in mixed company? Sarah groaned, brushing her long honey-brown locks over her shoulder. Oh, please, Dave rolled his eyes. If we all whipped it out right now, there's a good chance you'd be bigger than most of the guys here. Fair enough, she conceded, and everybody laughed. So, Nantz, what's your story, man? Frankie inquired, passing fresh beers out from the cooler. Heard you were on the way to do the show before a botch. Come on, Frankie. He doesn't want to relive that. It's all good. Alex waved him off and turned to Frankie. Yeah, I was on my way to the top. My agent was hammering out a deal with the show, and in a matter of weeks I was due to be on the main card. Out of a sense of loyalty, I wanted to play out my character for my current promotion. They had been so good to me over the years, and I didn't want to leave them hanging. I was sent to hand off the belt to this evil German character named the Baron. He was a great guy, hard-working grinder, been with the promotion for years. With me leaving, everyone felt like he deserved a run at the top. So what happened? Tommy asked, and everyone stared at Alex expectantly. We were having a hardcore match, he continued, just beating the ever-living fuck out of each other. Barbed wire bats, chairs, you name it. Blood was everywhere. The ring looked like the set of a chainsaw slasher fic. The finishing move that night was that he was going to throw me against the ropes, and when I came back he was going to flip me over the top rope and onto a flaming table. Everything was set perfectly, except when I got to him for the flip, his foot slipped on a pool of blood. So instead of gracefully flying through the air, I tumbled over the top rope, missed the table, and came crashing down onto the pavement. My leg was just destroyed. There was a series of groans as everyone imagined what that must have felt like, and Alex nodded. Y'all ain't kidding. It killed me to get that close to achieving my dream and missing it. Took 4 surgeries and 6 months of waiting before I could really get back into rehab. But even then, something was off. I tried everything I could think of to recover. New rehab exercises, every single supplement I could get my hands on. Hell, I even hired a witch to teach me some spells to remove the hexes from my injury and give me a black magic edge. He threw his hands up and chuckles rippled through his audience. How did that work out? Sarah inquired with an amused tone. What, the witchcraft? Alex shrugged, and she nodded. I never made it back to the show, but got my recruiting job shortly after that, and I'm back in the ring, so I'll let you be the judge. Can you do me? She asked shyly, a blush creeping up her cheeks. What man hasn't? Frankie snickered, and she flipped him the bird. Fuck off, Frankie, she growled, and then turned back to Alex. I mean, can you do a spell on me, to boost my chances? Sarah, come on, give it a rest. Tate rolled his eyes. No, it's okay, Alex spoke up, and turned to the Southern Belle. So, you want me to perform a little spell, huh? I think I can do that. His eyes lit up with mischievousness, and she grinned triumphantly. Man, I think I'm going to need another beer for this, Brian said loudly, and towed Frankie's leg. The spandex-clad man reached behind him and pulled out a cold one, handing it to Brian. Toss one my way too, bud, Tommy prompted, and Frankie lobbed one over. Sarah stood up and sashayed over to Alex, lowering herself to sit in front of him, cross-legged. She settled in, brushing her hair back over her shoulders and sitting up straight, looking as sweet as possible. What kind of spell do you want? The agent asked, crossing his own legs and cracking his knuckles. You know more than one? Her eyes widened in excitement. After the first one I cast on myself, I got my recruiting job, he explained. So I became a student of the black arts after that. Somebody snorted. He wasn't sure who, but Sarah kept her attention solely on him. Okay. She pursed her lips in thought, and then fluttered her eyelashes at him. Give me one that cleanses my aura and puts me on the right path. Okay. You ready? He held his arms out, hands hovering on either side of her. Oh, yes, she breathed, closing her eyes in anticipation. Furious vocat demonem hyacinto, Alex bellowed, and it was as if the entire forest had gone still. Et reposcere que egrediuntur de vita tua! He cried the last 3 words loudly, and the flames huffed up a bit at the same time. It was as if the air had thickened to soup, and for a few seconds nobody could breathe. The core group of wrestlers all felt a sudden sinking in their bodies, dread gripping their hearts with icy fingers. And then just as soon as it had come, it was over, and the fire returned to normal. "Dude," Frankie recoiled from the flames. "How the hell did you do that? You an amateur magician as well?" "Can't tell you my secrets," Alex said slyly, lowering his hands. "So, was that it?" Sarah asked, and he nodded. "Yes," he promised. "By the end of the night, you'll be cleansed." "And with that epic display, I think it's about time we head back," Tate piped up, and stood with a groan and a belch. "Blackwood is going to run us ragged tomorrow, and a hangover isn't a great idea." He also figured being the responsible one might endear him to the recruiter, so it was a win-win situation. Yeah, okay," Dave grumbled. "Brian, Tommy, grab that cooler and let's head out." Sarah put a hand on Alex's arm as they stood. I really feel like something changed. Like I have a clean slate and my sins have been washed away." Her big eyes glittered at him, amazed that something like that could actually work on her. "It takes a little time, but I assure you, by the time the sun rises, your life will have changed drastically." Alex smiled at her, and they headed back down the trail. A little ways to the north, a slight mound of dirt impacted and cracked. Chapter 3. The group trundled back to the small cluster of buildings that made up the training camp. As they strode across the dirt driveway, there was a haunting ding, ding, ding. It reverberated in the air like a ghost, hanging over their heads with that same sinking aura as Alex's spell earlier. Frankie was the first to stop, brow furrowing, and Brian bumped into him, jerking Tommy with the cooler. "Ow, man, what the—" Brian started, but he was cut off by another ding, ding, ding. It was clearly the bell for the wrestling ring, as if somebody was trying to get a match going. "Oh, what the hell, man?" Frankie exclaimed, motioning to the warehouse. "Is Blackwell already here and wants us to get training going already? It's the middle of the night." "Come on, we'd better go check." Brian sighed and set his end of the cooler down. "If we ignore it, we're going to be running the hill until morning." Sarah yawned loudly in protest, wandering after the group as they changed direction. Tate pushed forward to take the lead and shoved through the side door. "I would have napped if I'd known he was coming early," Sarah sighed, stretching her arms above her head before slamming into Tate's back. He'd stopped short, the others piling up behind him, blood running cold. His heart pounded in his ears so loudly that he didn't even hear the snarky protests of the others as they pushed inside. There, in the middle of the wrestling ring, was Blue Diablo, in full costume, beneath an eerie teal-tinged spotlight. "Ding, ding, ding. What the fuck is he doing here?" Tate breathed the words, blinking rapidly, hoping that the image would just go away. He wanted to be hallucinating. It was the only explanation for what was happening. "How the fuck is he here?" Dave blurted, and the blonde smacked him in the chest to shut him up. The rest of the group stared open-mouthed at the wrestler that was apparently back from the dead. Save for Alex. He glanced back and forth at his new co-workers, eyebrows raised. "Dave, go see what he wants," Tate demanded in a low whisper. "What? Fuck that, you go," Dave hissed back. "We got your back," the blonde insisted. "Stop being a pussy and go check it out." Dave gulped hard and glanced back at the rest of the group. He received a series of nods and thumbs up as encouragement, and he turned back to Blue Diablo, sweat springing to his skin. "Fucking hell," he muttered, and started to shuffle slowly towards the ring. Ding, ding, ding. "Who is that?" Alex inquired, keeping his voice low. "Doesn't look like Blackwell." "This wrestler called the Blue Diablo," Tommy replied, crossing his arms. "Some luchador out of Mexico. He lasted a whole day in this camp last year before he went AWOL. Yeah, he wussed out and ran away the first night, Brian added, shaking his head in disgust. Well, Alex said with a shrug. Looks like he's here to redeem himself. Ding, ding, ding. Dave ducked into the ring reluctantly, examining the man he hadn't seen in a year. He was wearing his signature black and blue mask and matching couture. He looked like he'd had a roll around in the dirt. Or maybe, Dave supposed, crawled out of a grave. But he didn't have a single scratch on him. No blood, just bulging muscles and a thick neck. Hey there. Hey, BD, he stammered, and glanced around nervously, realizing that the bell had stopped. It was disconcerting, and made his stomach sink down into his toes. How you doing, man? The wrestler remained motionless, arms at his sides, eyes staring straight ahead like an eerie blue and black-clad statue. So, yeah. Look, sorry about the last time we saw each other. Dave scratched the back of his head, swallowing hard, mouth dry as sandpaper. I mean, everybody is really sorry. Still no movement, and his skin began to crawl. Can I get you anything? Some water or something? Blue Diablo cocked his head suddenly in a sharp movement, causing Dave to take an involuntary step back. He wasn't yet sure if the guy was real or an apparition, but he wasn't exactly keen to find out. Blue Diablo lifted his arm slowly, pointing a finger at the bell. Ding, ding, ding. Dave furrowed his brow and glanced back to the group with a shrug, unsure of what to do. When he turned back, he met the underside of Blue Diablo's chop and crumpled to the floor. He rubbed his chest absently, looking up at the demon looming over him. Not an apparition, then. The hell, man? Dave grunted as he sat up. I said I was... The rest of his sentence turned to a gargle as Blue Diablo hooked his entire hand into the lower half of Dave's mouth. Holy shit, man! Frankie ran forward, and Dave smacked the floor to tap out. The bell rang to signal the end of the match, and Frankie slid underneath the bottom rope, flipping his poofy hair out of his eyes. You want a piece of me? He roared, and Blue Diablo pointed at the bell again. Ding, ding, ding. As soon as the next match began, the Blue Diablo jerked his hand back, taking Dave's entire jawbone with it in a sickening snap. The hole where Dave's lower mouth used to be gargled and guggled, and the entire group gaped in horror. Blue Diablo shoved the gooey bone directly into Dave's eyes like a pair of gory sunglasses. Holy fuck! Frankie shrieked. I'm out of here! He practically flew through the ropes and backed away from the ring, not wanting to take his eyes off of the murdering wrestler that was back from the dead. Blue Diablo looked squarely at him and held up a fist. His thumb unfurled, then his pointer finger, then his middle, and so on as if counting. Dude, get Dave out of there, man! Tommy screamed at the rising of Blue Diablo's ring finger. Fuck you! Frankie cried shrilly as the pinky finger made an appearance. I ain't going back in there! We're getting the fuck out of here, then. Tate backed up, arms scrabbling behind him for the door. Alex narrowed his eyes as Blue Diablo raised his second fist, his thumb poking out for number 6, and he took Frankie's arm before they could all run back outside. You have to get back in the ring now, he hissed. Fuck that, Frankie shrieked, jerking his arm out of Alex's grasp. Pointer finger. Do it now, the newbie yelled. Middle finger. Ring finger. Or what? Frankie shoved Alex in frustration as Blue Diablo raised his second pinky finger. Ding, ding, ding. The bell signaled the end of the match, and the blue and black-clad wrestler vanished. The group collectively gasped, heads darting around like spooked chickens, and then Sarah squealed as Blue Diablo reappeared directly behind Frankie. He punched right into his back, his hand coming through his chest. Bloody hand gripping a still-beating heart. Frankie coughed a mouthful of blood and looked down in shock, eyes widening in fear at the sight of his own heart, before they rolled right back into his head, and his body crumpled to the floor. Tate screamed something unintelligible, flinging the door open behind him, and the rest of the group sprinted after him, adrenaline pumping. They fled across to the bunkhouse, Alex bringing up the rear, and Tommy locked the deadbolt, collapsing against the wall. Sarah peeked out the window. He's not following us, she panted, and crossed her arms over her stomach. She shivered, despite the fact that it wasn't cold. What in the ever-loving fuck was that? Tommy blurted, voice strained. He just ripped Dave's fucking jaw off and stabbed him in the eyes. And Frankie. Brian scrubbed his hands down his face, eyes wide with fear. What the hell? Tate growled and shoved Alex against the wall, bringing himself nose to nose with their newest co-worker. Tate! Sarah stepped forward. What are you doing? This piece of shit knows something, the blonde snarled. He told Frankie to get back in the ring, and I want to know why. Alex pushed him back and stood up straight, running his hands through his hair. He challenged the Blue Diablo to a match, and the bell immediately rang, he explained. Frankie jumped out of the ring, and then the Blue Diablo started counting to 10. He was counting him out. Like a disqualification? Brian raised an eyebrow. Exactly, Alex nodded. Frankie lost the match, so the Blue Diablo took his victory trophy, which happened to be Frankie's heart. Man, how the fuck do you know that? Tommy asked, exasperated. Because the Blue Diablo is an avenging spirit, and they have rules, Alex replied, and every one of his co-workers backed up a step, bodies tensing. Tate and Brian shared a pointed look, and Sarah's eyes darted back and forth with nervousness. What? She stammered. What is he avenging? Generally speaking, avenging spirits come back after their life is cut short in a nefarious way, Alex replied casually, as if he were talking about the weather. Their anger keeps them tethered to this realm, and when the opportunity presents itself, they strike back. But what if we didn't do anything? She asked shrilly. The avenging spirit might not see it that way, came the calm reply. Man, how would you know? Tate barked. I thought you were a recruiter. If you'll recall, I never said who I was a recruiter for, Alex said. You just assumed I was here for wrestling. You have about 2 seconds to come clean before I whoop your fucking ass, Tate growled and took a step towards the now implicated newcomer. I work for the agency. Alex took a seat on a nearby dresser, unaffected by Tommy and Brian pulling the blonde back from his threat. Which one? Brian asked. It's just called the agency, the newcomer explained. We're a ragtag group that battles demons, spirits, and every other nightmarish thing you can imagine. I'm here at this compound because we've had someone on our radar for a while. Tate froze, his shoulders drawing back as he shook off Brian and Tommy. Well, who is it? He inquired, raising his chin. Sorry, but I can't divulge that information. Alex shook his head. It would skew the results of the test. Test? Sarah cried. You mean you knew that this spirit would start killing us? Why the fuck didn't you warn us? Because my orders are to test and recruit the target, the agent replied. Everyone in this room is expendable. We're headed towards a massive war, and we're pulling out all the stops to recruit the best of the best, regardless of the cost. If we don't, then it won't matter if you survive the night. He waved at them flippantly, and then turned his gaze on the Southern Belle. Besides, if I came up to you in the locker room and said, Hey, Sarah, you shouldn't go to the camp because there is an avenging spirit that will rip your head off, would you have actually listened to me? She paused, and then blushed slightly, shaking her head in the negative. So how do we kill this fucker? Tate squared his shoulders, cracking his knuckles. Don't know if we can, Alex shrugged. So what do we do? Brian moaned, wringing his hands. Well, we have no transportation, the agent sighed. We are 20 miles from the nearest main road and would die of exposure or wildlife attack if we tried to make a run for it. And we have no cell reception. The only thing I can think of is to split up. Split up? Tommy exclaimed. Are you crazy? Yep, we split up, Alex nodded, ignoring the outburst. This particular avenging spirit has picked wrestling as his form of vengeance. If he challenges you, you have to fight, and fight clean. As Frankie found out, you don't want to end up with a disqualification. To hell with that, man, Tommy cut in. If you want to go off on your own, you have at it, cowboy. I say we pair up, search this compound for a phone or something to ride, and get the fuck out of here." "Hell yeah!" Brian clapped his brother on the back. "If he shows up in front of us, he's gonna have to face the brain bashers, and we'll send his taco-eating ass back to the netherworld." They high-fived and bumped chests. "That's fine, if you want to go off in pairs," Alex conceded. But there was just a note of warning in his voice. Just something to contemplate when one of you gets challenged. You saw what he could do, both to Dave and Frankie. I can pretty much guarantee that you don't want to face off against him and his tag team partner. The brothers shared a worried glance. "Noted," Tommy nodded gravely. Tate stepped forward, waving for everyone's attention, clearly attempting to take charge. "All right, here is what we're going to do," the blonde said loudly, commanding the room. "Brian, you and Tommy look through the office. See if you can find a landline that works, or any keys. Sarah and I will check the storage shed to see if there are any ATVs or anything. Nantz?" He turned to the agent perched on the dresser, who stared back at him incredulously. Tate swallowed. "Nantz, what do you think you should do?" he inquired politely. "Well, if this is a rampaging, avenging spirit, he's going to want to see me eventually," Alex shrugged. "So I'm going to go to the place where I feel most comfortable. The ring. You guys do whatever you have to do, and if any of you survive, head on back to the ring, and we'll figure out what's next." "Okay, man, well, look, you just be safe," Tate said gently, his tone laced with condescension and desperation for acceptance. "I'm going to figure out a way to get us out of this. I mean, you said this was a test, right? Well, I'm going to ace it. Then you can buy me a beer and tell me about the agency." "I look forward to seeing what my future recruit can do," Alex replied with a nod, and the blonde grinned with excitement. "All right, come on everybody, let's do this." Tate clenched a fist and turned to the door. He unlocked the deadbolt and flung the door open, tugging Sarah along in the direction of the storage shed. Chapter 4. Brian kicked open the door to the office, heart pounding with newfound adrenaline. The avenging spirit of the guy they'd killed, no, the guy that Tate killed, was back to kill them all, and they had to figure out a way to live through it, so that somebody could get recruited by a demon-hunting agency? He shook his head. It had been a crazy day. "Check those filing cabinets," he instructed his brother. "I'm going to check the desk." "Got it," Tommy replied, and scurried over to the far corner. He jiggled the metal drawers, but they were locked. Brian picked up the phone, hope making his heart leap, but there was no dial tone. "Damn it, line is dead." He slammed the handset down in frustration. "Guess Blackwell cheaped out on his bill. You got anything?" "Man, this fucking thing is locked up tight," Tommy grunted, and then threw the filing cabinet over on its side. Ding, ding, ding. "Oh, shit," the black-haired brother moaned. "What was that?" I don't know, man," Brian whispered, and then the room began to light up. It was as if someone was upping the exposure on a photograph, the very air illuminating until both brothers covered their eyes to avoid blindness. After a moment, Tommy peeked through his fingers to see the light dimming, and his hand dropped to his side in shock. "Fuck me, man," he breathed, smacking Brian's arm to get his attention. There were neon glowing ropes lining the room, making it into a makeshift wrestling ring. The blue Diablo materialized into existence before their very eyes, and they both cried out, taking an involuntary step back in surprise. Blue Diablo looked back and forth between the two men, accentuating the movement of his head. "Well, come on." Brian had enough and threw his arms up. "Who do you want?" Blue Diablo stared at him for a moment longer, and then turned to Tommy, extending his pointer finger. He curled it up in a come-hither motion. "God damn it," Tommy muttered, his blood pounding in his ears. "Go get him, man, you got this," Brian cheered, simultaneously terrified for his brother, but also relieved that it wasn't him going in. "I don't know, man. What if I just don't get in the ring?" Tommy wondered, and Blue Diablo tilted his head to the side slightly. He raised his fist and then poked out his thumb, then his pointer finger. "I think that's your answer," Brian inclined his head. Yeah, no shit, man. Tommy let out a huge whoosh of breath. Come on, you gotta get in the ring, his brother urged. Brian, promise me? The darker-haired basher pleaded. Whatever you do, don't interfere. I don't want my heart ripped out on a disqualification. Okay, man, just go. Go get him, Brian agreed, and clapped his brother on the back as Blue Diablo was halfway through his second hand of counting. Tommy screamed in anticipation and ran full tilt at the ring, hopping over the top rope. The demon put his hands down, effectively ending the count. Ding, ding, ding. Come on, you got this, Brian cried, clapping his hands with encouragement. His blood pounded in his ears and his skin crawled, icy fingers clutching at his heart. He didn't think his brother had this at all. Tommy managed to land the first blow, right across his opponent's masked face, and Blue Diablo reciprocated, with a quick uppercut jab into the dark-haired wrestler's chin. Tommy's teeth clanked together painfully and he grunted, throwing his shoulders into Blue Diablo's stomach. The blue-clad wrestler flipped over his opponent gracefully, punching him in the lower back on the way down. Tommy fell towards the ropes, running and bouncing back into the ring. He rolled his shoulders and bounced back and forth on the balls of his feet, glaring at his otherworldly opponent. Blue Diablo darted to the left, then quickly rolled to the right, leaping up and landing his knees on either side of Tommy's head. He twisted his body and flung the dark-haired wrestler to the floor, flipping back and landing his ankle directly on Tommy's throat. Come on, man! Brian screamed, voice strained as his brother rolled over, wheezing and coughing as he slowly got to his hands and knees. Blue Diablo cracked his knuckles as Tommy staggered to his feet, and then lunged forward with a dropkick, catching his opponent in the side of the head. Blue Diablo fell to the side but tucked into a roll and bounced right back up. He came at Tommy with a powerful haymaker, sending the dark-haired wrestler to one knee. Blue Diablo climbed up to the top rope and leapt off, kicking his opponent square in the face. Tommy hit the floor hard, barely able to move. Get up, man! Brian screamed, fists clenched tight. Come on, get up! He watched as Blue Diablo strutted around the ring, chest puffed out, as if trying to pump up a crowd. The masked demon turned and stared right into his eyes. What? Brian yelled. What are you waiting for? You have him beat. Just pin him and let him go. His voice cracked at the last word, and his heart skipped a beat as Blue Diablo slowly shook his head in the negative, drawing his finger across his throat in the signature sign for death. Brian clutched the top rope, ready to leap in to save his brother, but Blue Diablo executed a lightning-fast jump kick. His foot landed right in the middle of Brian's chest, flinging the blonde back into the far wall. He grunted as he crumpled to the floor, struggling to breathe from the force of the stunning kick. Tommy! He managed to croak, but all he could do was watch with wide-eyed horror as Blue Diablo wedged his foot under his brother and flipped him over. He took one of Tommy's legs on either side of his hips and then turned, flipping his dazed opponent back over onto his face. He leaned back, using the dark-haired wrestler's ass as a seat, bending him in a classic sharpshooter move. Tommy shrieked something incoherent as his lower back bent back at a near-impossible angle and tapped himself out frantically. Ding, ding, ding! Blue Diablo didn't let up, muscles bulging as he continued to bend Tommy's body back, until there was a sickening crunch, and his dark-haired opponent went limp against the floor. He stood and twisted the last shreds of Tommy's midsection apart and whipped the lower half of his body over the ropes. Brian recoiled in horror, blinking almost dumbly at the severed half of his brother's body strewn across the office floor in front of him, blood pooling. The blonde let out an anguished cry and leapt to his feet, rushing the ring with fists flying. Just as he reached the ropes, both the ring and the Blue Diablo vanished, leaving just the live brother and the dead brother behind. What the hell? Brian whipped around in a circle, heart clenched in anger and fear. Oh God, Tommy! He scrubbed his hands down his face as he approached the mangled top half of his brother, face frozen forever in a grimace of intense pain. Brian knelt, not caring that the blood billowing from Tommy's torso flooded his knees. He screwed his fists into his eyes, clenching his jaw, and then let out another scream. "I'm going to kill you!" he yelled at the ceiling, hoping that the blue Diablo would hear him, from whatever plane of existence he resided in. "You hear me? I'm going to rip your fucking heart out!" Chapter 5. The warehouse that doubled as the compound's garage was dusty and full of old broken training gear. There were no vehicles to be found, and Sarah's heart sank as she ran her hands through her honey-brown locks. She tried to control her shaking fingers as she did so, and jumped when Tate angrily kicked a pile of broken ring equipment. "How the hell are there no vehicles here?" he barked. "Does Blackwell not enjoy fun?" "You've known him for years. Does he strike you as the type of man that enjoys fun?" She pursed her lips and clasped her quivering hands in front of her. "I mean, other than torturing us on those runs." "Point taken," Tate sighed, and yanked down a stack of blankets in hopes that there was an ATV or something hiding beneath. "Fuck! I've got nothing over here. You?" "Nothing except training equipment," she replied, eyes darting around the garage jerkily. "Come on, let's get back to Nantz." He waved her towards him, and she scurried to his side, happy to be leaving. Ding, ding, ding. "Oh God, he's here," Sarah shrieked, blood running ice cold in her veins. "Run!" Tate grabbed her wrist and took off towards the warehouse doors, but skidded to a stop at the sight of the blue Diablo standing there, arms crossed across his chest in an intimidating display. He took in each of them separately, shifting his head back and forth to size each of them up. "Well," the tall, all-American blonde dropped Sarah's wrist and slammed his fist against his own chest. "Come on, motherfucker, let's do this." Blue Diablo cocked his head and then pointed at Sarah. Her breath caught in her throat, and her heart sped up double speed, and she looked to Tate with wide, fearful eyes. "Oh God, what do I do?" she asked, chest constricting. "You fight, and be sure to make it clean," he replied, not taking his eyes off of Blue Diablo. "How? There's no ring," she exclaimed, and turned to her opponent. "Where's the ring?" The blue-clad wrestler waved his arm in the air, motioning to the room around them. "What?" Sarah's voice was shrill and panicked as she turned back to Tate. "What does that mean?" "I think it's a backstage match," he replied with a shrug. "What?" she cried. "Backstage match," he asked, eyes on Blue Diablo, and the demon wrestler nodded slowly and menacingly. "What does that mean?" Sarah panted, mind going blank on any rational explanation. "It means you use anything and everything you can find to hit him with," Tate explained. "Nothing is out of bounds." "But," she wrung her hands in front of her, "Sarah, focus," he demanded, and grabbed her shoulders. He turned her to face him, eyes blazing as he forced her to look at him. "Find whatever you can and beat him down. You can do this." She nodded jerkily and stepped back, hopping up and down a bit and taking a deep breath to try and psych herself up. Tate looked at her opponent, who dismissively waved him away. He reluctantly backed up, jaw and fists clenched. Sarah tried to gain the upper hand right away by running full steam towards Blue Diablo and sailing through the air. Her elbow connected with his throat, and he stumbled back, but quickly regained his footing and charged at her. He lowered his shoulder and caught her right in the stomach, sending her crashing into a stack of boxes. Glad for the cushioning, she rolled over and grabbed 2 5-pound dumbbells, springing back to her feet. Blue Diablo lunged forward, a flurry of fists, and she lifted the weights with expert speed to meet each punch, his knuckles cracking against the weights every time. He grunted into a backflip and grasped a large ring bell from a pile of old equipment, whipping it through the air as if it were light as a feather. Sarah ducked, the metal hitting the wall behind her with a loud resonating clang that made her wince. Blue Diablo took advantage of the distraction to leap into a flying kick, catching her right in the chest. She flew backwards, losing her grip on the weights, back hitting the floor and knocking the wind right out of her lungs, Sarah! Tate cried. Get up! Come on! He urged, voice wavering but trying to sound as demanding as possible. He took a step forward, but Blue Diablo instantly raised his hand, wagging his finger in a clear motion that indicated no. Tate reluctantly stayed put, eyes hopeful as the brown-haired bombshell managed to get to her feet. She lunged for a short metal pipe next to her and swung it up like a golf club at Blue Diablo's chin. He dodged, and then dodged again, then dove forward and caught the pipe in his armpit. She tried to wrench it free but quickly gave up and punched him in the face instead. He barely moved from the impact and took the pipe in his free hand, swinging viciously at her head. Sarah didn't even have a chance to cry out before the metal connected with the side of her head, and her body flopped to the concrete floor like a rag doll. "You won, motherfucker! Now let her go!" Tate bellowed, as Sarah struggled to regain her bearings, trying to get to her knees. Blue Diablo shook his head at his spectator, malice in his eyes, and dropped the metal pipe with a sharp clang. He kicked at her chest, and then whipped around with inhuman speed, grabbing her head over his shoulder and dropping to the floor in a stunner, snapping her neck. "Sarah!" Tate screamed as her body flopped lifelessly on the floor, and his desperate eyes found Blue Diablo, who glared back at him before vanishing. The blonde wrestler scrambled over to his unmoving co-worker, slipping a hand down around her throat to confirm that she was dead. He clenched his jaw and growled in anger, shaking his head in disbelief. Chapter 6. Both Tate and Brian entered the training warehouse at the same time from opposite directions, wide-eyed and terrified, and full of purpose as they strode in. "Tate, you okay, man?" Brian blurted, jogging to rush towards his co-worker. "Where's Sarah?" "That motherfucking luchador got her." The taller wrestler shook his head in disdain, running his hands shakily through his hair. "Yeah, he got Tommy too." The shorter man's voice cracked at the mention of his brother's death. "Ripped his fucking legs off with a sharpshooter." "You boys okay?" Alex yelled over to the duo, and they both turned to see him casually hanging out on the edge of the ring. "Find anything?" He was the picture of perfect relaxation, arms resting on the bottom rope, legs dangling off the edge of the training ring. The only thing missing was a beer in his hand, and maybe a cigar to complete the look. "Fuck no, we aren't okay!" Brian cried as they started towards the ring. "Sarah and Tommy are dead." "And we came up empty," Tate added as they walked. "No vehicles, there's no way out." The duo suddenly froze, faces going pale, and Alex furrowed his brow. "Why did you stop, guys?" he asked, confusion. "Nantz, get out of there!" Tate cried, and their newest team member slowly turned his head to see the Blue Diablo standing in the center of the ring. His shoulders pulsed with rippling muscle beneath his signature blue and black outfit, and a smile broke out on Alex's face. He casually got to his feet and faced the demon, stepping forward so they were within arm's reach of each other. He raised a hand as if going in for an arm wrestle, and Blue Diablo stared at his hand, then back up to Alex's eyes. He slowly raised his own hand, and they clasped their fists together in a power handshake. "Been far too long, brother," Alex said with a grin, and the Blue Diablo silently nodded in agreement. The duo on the floor were frozen in disbelief. "What the fuck, man?" Tate cried, breaking up the reunion. "Well, gents," the newest wrestler bellowed, turning to face the two remaining members of his team. "Back when I first started my wrestling journey, nobody in my home state of Texas would give me a shot. In fact, the only promotion that would pick up my contract was a small indie group down in Mexico. That's where I met the Blue Diablo. He not only took me under his wing, but we had great chemistry in the ring, so we joined forces and created Tex-Mex, the most feared tag team in the region. Spent a year kicking ass from town to town. Didn't take long after that for me to catch on here in Texas, rise through the ranks, and actually have some pull with the promoters. That's when I started to pull some strings to get my old friend a spot here in your little promotion. I knew luchadors can be a hard sell, but I didn't realize he would face this kind of racist backlash." He shook his head. "You betrayed us, man," Brian blurted, pointing a shaking finger at the ring. "I betrayed you?" Alex narrowed his eyes, all traces of humor gone from his face. "I betrayed you? Why? Because I stood by and watched as the avenging spirit of my friend that you assholes murdered came back for revenge?" He snarled the word murdered, and both the remaining wrestlers swallowed hard, side-glancing each other nervously. "What? Tate stammered. "What are you talking about?" "I've known the Blue Diablo for years, and he's the most dedicated wrestler I've ever worked with," Alex said firmly. "So when I got word of his disappearance and the story from you dickheads was that he just wussed out and went AWOL, I knew something was up. Took me months of researching the area and walking these hills until I found where you buried him. And I'll be honest with you, it took every ounce of restraint to not just turn this over to the local authorities and let you rot in prison for the next 20 or 30 years. But I did my job and reported it back to my boss, who came up with a plan." Alex grinned with malice. "See, I'm not here to recruit you, Tate. I'm here to recruit him." He pointed to Blue Diablo, who crossed his considerable arms across his chest. "Well, congrats, Nantz. You got what you wanted," Tate said, and put his hands up in surrender. "So we'll just leave you to your reunion." Ding, ding, ding. Tate and Brian gulped, both taking a step back from the ring. "Yeah, Tater Tot. Remember when I said you wouldn't want to face off against the Blue Diablo's tag team partner?" Alex grinned. "You're about to find out why, you murdering racist piece of shit." Tate growled, his ego having taken far too much of a beating that night to back down. "All right, Nantz," he hissed. "I kicked your ass last night in the ring. I can do it again." "No script this time, bub," Alex sneered, and Blue Diablo lifted his hand, beginning his signature count to 10. "Well, it seems as though my partner here is anxious to get started. You care to join us in the ring, or do you just want to forfeit and save yourselves a savage beating before death?" Tate squared his shoulders and planted his feet, ready for an extra deadly game of chicken. Brian looked from his partner to the duo in the ring and grabbed the taller man's arms, trying to pull him towards the ring. "Come on, man, get a move on," he urged, though having no luck trying to move his last remaining co-worker. "At least in there we have a chance," he begged, but Tate still didn't want to move. Brian gave up trying to drag him and ran full tilt at the ring just as finger number 8 made an appearance. He slid under the rope just in time, making him the legal opponent, and giving his partner time to get to the side of the ring. Blue Diablo put his hands down, officially ending the count. Ding, ding, ding. "Would you like to do the honors, or should I soften him up a bit first?" Alex said, motioning to Brian, and his longtime friend waved flippantly as if to say, "Go ahead." The demon's partner grinned and lunged forward, landing a haymaker on Brian's face for first blood. The blonde landed his own haymaker, and they viciously jabbed at each other. Brian grunted and growled, fighting for his life, as Alex seemed amused by the exchange, happy to be raining revenge on one of the men that killed his friend. They fell into a fierce grapple, and Alex was able to get a grip on Brian's arm, hooking his thigh up over his head to bend him over. He wrenched the arm out straight, bending it back enough to incapacitate his opponent. Blue Diablo climbed up to the top rope and leapt off, knee first into Brian's elbow, the sickening crunch of it shattering, echoing in the large space. Tate winced at the sound, inching towards the ring, not sure what to do. He stubbornly didn't want to be a part of this fight, now being the last man standing with nothing to lose. He didn't have anyone to one-up, and there was no recruitment in his favor. He didn't know if he was going to survive or not, and maybe all he could do was just stall until Blackwell arrived. If they could just stall, keep Alex and the Blue Diablo fighting until help arrived. Brian collapsed into the floor, screaming in pain as he tried to get to his knees, slithering along the ground towards Tate. Alex tagged his undead friend, jogging to the side as Blue Diablo grabbed Brian by the hair. The blonde reached out and missed Tate's hand by a hair's breadth, unable to tag him, and then his world went white as Blue Diablo violently chopped him 3 times in the throat. "Please," Brian gasped and wheezed, his arm hanging limp and useless next to him. The pain was intense and all-encompassing, and he felt nauseated at the sight of bone sticking out through flesh. "Please, no more." His opponent took a step back and glanced at his partner, who shrugged. Alex inclined his head to Blue Diablo with a mischievous grin on his face. "You heard the man?" he said, and his partner picked up the moaning man with seemingly no effort whatsoever. He held him like a body surfer, his face pointing to the ceiling, and then brought him down hard over his knee for a backbreaker. The sharp snap rendered Brian lifeless, his back literally breaking in 2, and Blue Diablo tossed the body onto the mat like a crumpled-up piece of garbage. He brushed his hands together as if to wash his hands of the fight, and then turned to Tate. The blonde's fists were clenched so tight his knuckles were white, and he clenched his jaw as Blue Diablo pointed at him. He flipped his hand and bent his finger in a come-hither motion, and Tate raised an eyebrow, shrugging as if regretful. "You know, I'd love to, but rules are rules," he said, proud of the way he was able to keep his voice from shaking. "If I come into the ring for more than a few moments, you can disqualify me since I didn't tag." Alex scoffed and lowered his face into his hand, shaking his head in disbelief. Blue Diablo stopped for a moment as if thinking, and then turned to Brian's lifeless body. He reached down and grabbed the floppy, shattered arm, twisting it to snap it the rest of the way off at the elbow. He flipped it in his hand like a drumstick and held it out to his opponent. "Are you kidding me?" Tate threw his arms up. "As you said, rules are rules," Alex replied with a smirk. The All-American star, the last of his crew, gingerly brushed his fingers over Brian's cold, dead digits and reluctantly stepped into the ring. He could only hope he'd stalled enough. How long could he survive now? Help would come. Help had to come. Blue Diablo stood in the center of the ring, arms outstretched like Jesus on the cross, offering his opponent a free shot. Tate let out a strained cry and leapt forward, jabbing his fist right into his mouth. Blue Diablo shook it off and patted his face, clearly smiling beneath his mask to show that the punch had been nothing more than swatting at flies. Tate growled as he received the come-hither motion again, and leapt forward with another jab. Blue Diablo shook his shoulders and wiggled his head a little, still unfazed and mocking him with his body language. Tate screamed in frustration. Despite everything, he couldn't stand the insinuation that he wasn't strong enough to at least make a dent in this guy, demon or no. He punched him again with a scream, and this time Blue Diablo smacked his arm away like nothing, and then came in hard. Before Tate could even register it, he'd taken 4 punches to the face and was falling towards the ground. He felt weightless for a moment, as if time had slowed down, and couldn't believe what was happening. He barely felt the floor rise up to meet him, stunned into unmoving stupidity from his shock. Blue Diablo climbed up to the top rope and executed a graceful swan dive, ending in a flying headbutt to Tate's face. Cartilage crunched with the impact, shattering the blonde's nose, and this development struck Tate out of his reverie, and he began to moan in pain, rolling back and forth on the ground, spreading his blood about everywhere. Blue Diablo strutted around the ring once, chest puffed out in magnificence, and he stopped next to Alex, tagging him in. "You want a setup?" Alex grinned, and his old friend nodded. "Double drop kick, or something a little more vicious?" he inquired, and Blue Diablo simply cocked his head in response. Okay, I hear you." Alex waved him off as Tate managed to peel himself off of the floor. He wavered on his feet, brain clearly not firing properly in his daze. "Come on," Tate slurred, raising his weak arms. "What you got, Mr. Agent Man?" He flung his arm limply forward, and Alex easily dodged it. ducking under his arm and popping up behind him, curling one arm under his chin and the other over his head in a sleeper hold. "You took my friend from me," Alex snarled in Tate's ear, squeezing his arms tight. "Before you're sacrificed to bring him back to me. I just gotta know. Why? Why did you kill him?" Tate sputtered and choked, gasping for air, and Alex let up the tiniest bit to allow him to speak. "He was a threat. I wanted to move up." "A threat?" Alex snapped, and tightened his arms exponentially, causing Tate's arms to flail around, his lips turning purple. "You murdered my friend, my tag team partner, because you were worried about your pathetic little career?" Alex resisted the urge to choke him right to death and let him go. Tate collapsed, dragging in huge gulpfuls of air painfully into his lungs, stars exploding behind his eyes with the sudden oxygen filling him. Alex ran at the edge of the ring and leapt, launching himself up off of the ropes back towards his gasping opponent. He landed squarely on the side of Tate's head, his ass driving the blonde's cheek into the mat. He jumped up, grabbing a fistful of his victim's hair in his hand to drag him across the ring. He lifted Tate's neck to rest on the second rope, the American All-Star now limply accepting his fate, unable to fight back. His legs dangled off of the edge of the ring, his body in a relaxed position, reclining against the outside of the ring like he was chilling around the campfire. Blue Diablo dashed forward and vaulted over the corner post, swinging his feet in a graceful arc straight at Tate's face. The force of the kick against the taut rope decapitated the blonde head, and straight at Alex's form, who had to duck to avoid taking it in the nose. "Holy hell, man! Good velocity on that one," he exclaimed, grin breaking out on his face. Blue Diablo hopped over the rope and met him in the middle of the ring. He extended his hand and they shook again, this time with reverence for one another. "Now what?" Blue Diablo asked, his voice thrumming deep like a bass guitar. "My friend," Alex said with a smile, "you have two choices, and I'm not going to pressure you to pick one over the other. The first option is that I can perform an incantation that will set your spirit free. You'll be able to move on to the afterlife and live in peace. From what I hear, it is quite nice on the other side. And after everything you've been through, you have more than earned that peace. Now, the second option is a bit more complicated. I work for a group called the Agency, and in a nutshell, we go around fighting demons, creatures, and pretty much anything that wants to do the world harm. So if you entrust your spirit to me, you can help me fight against the forces of darkness. I won't lie to you, this isn't a pleasant option. In addition to facing down some of the most terrifying things known to man, when you entrust your spirit to me, you are essentially a passenger. You'll be trapped in my body and will only be able to experience what I experience, except for the times when I release you. I'll be honest, I've never had a spirit, avenging or otherwise, be a passenger before, so I don't know how long you'll be able to stay out at a time. We are kind of in uncharted territory here, but from the research I've done, it would be in short bursts. A few hours at most before you'd need to recharge. Now, I know I said I wasn't going to pressure you, but there is one more bit of info. Things have been ramping up as of late. Bad things. We don't know what this means in the grand scheme of it all, but there's a storm brewing, and I could use your help. He opened his palms to surrender the decision to his friend. Blue Diablo inclined his head. "You came for me," he said, dark, gravelly voice reverberating in Alex's head. "I will help you." "Thank you, my friend," the living wrestler grinned. "Are you ready?" Blue Diablo nodded, and they clasped hands again, arms bent at the elbows, wrists curled. There was a bright flash of light, and the undead wrestler felt like he was falling fast into an endless abyss, before snapping still and looking out of a pair of eyes that had been opposite his own only moments before. Alex looked down at the blue and black mask in his hand and carefully folded it, tucking it into his pocket. Epilogue. Alex grabbed his bag from his bunk, having not even had to unpack it after the night's events. He slid his phone from the side pocket and hit a single number, cradling it between his shoulder and ear. He carefully slipped the folded-up mask into the duffel bag and straightened up as the line went live with a click. "Hey, boss, it's Nantz," he greeted. "The mission was a success."
"That is excellent news."
The boss's voice bubbled with excitement on the other end.
"Were there any casualties?"
"Everyone that came up here with me," Alex shrugged, with a non-committal shrug. "The blue Diablo laid waste to them."
Good riddance,"
came the tart reply.
"Bunch of murdering assholes."
Alex barked a laugh, agreeing wholeheartedly with the sentiment. "I'll need a clean-up crew to plant a body that can pass for me," he said. "We have enough things going on without explaining to the police why there are 6 dead bodies up here instead of 7. Oh, and have someone run interference on Blackwell. He's supposed to be up here in the morning. That should buy enough time. I'll have Baptiste get one dispatched immediately." "So, what's my next assignment?" Alex took his bag in hand and headed outside into the crisp mountain air.
"I'm sending you the coordinates of a town that is about a 6-hour drive from your location,"
the boss told him.
"Real nasty situation going on there that could really use your help."
"Got details?" Alex raised an eyebrow.
"Baptiste can give you specifics on the way, but there is a nasty pestilence demon that is laying waste to the town. Took out 2 of our agents, too."
"So why not just firebomb the place and call it a day?" the agent asked, lips twisting in thought.
"Because there is a survivor who is immune,"
the boss replied.
"From what Baptiste has told me, he's well-trained and has enough weaponry to invade a small nation."
"So, you want me to recruit him?" Alex confirmed.
"If you can,"
came the reply.
"We can use all the help we can get."
"No doubt, boss, no doubt." Alex took a deep breath, staring off into the horizon. It looked like any other horizon, but he knew what lay over it for him was a lot different than people not tasked with saving the world.
"Check your phone for coordinates of a drop car,"
the boss said with finality.
"Happy hunting, Nantz."
"Thanks, boss," he said, and ended the call. He swung his duffel bag over his shoulder and strode up the training hill, staring down at the blinking red dot on his GPS app. The end.